Yeah, thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Minister, it is an incredible contradiction, really, that the state is one of the biggest landlords with one of the greatest portfolios of properties, with the OPW, with properties in every town and village, and yet at the same time hundreds of millions are expended in subsidising private accommodation and emergency accommodation. And I'm wondering what initiatives have been undertaken by the OPW to make some of that state property available to local authorities in order to deal with the housing crisis that's presently underway.
Minister, number 6.
I propose to take 6 and 15 together, as you rightly say. The Office of Public Works on behalf of the State manages a large and diverse property portfolio which range from office accommodation to heritage properties, visitor centres, Garda stations and so on. Within this portfolio, there is a number of vacant properties. The majority of these currently vacant properties are recently closed Garda stations. The remainder consists of properties such as customs posts, former Coast Guard stations, and sundry other properties located across the country. OPW has a clearly defined policy relating to vacant policies that are identified as surplus to requirements. In the first instance, the OPW engages with other public service bodies, including relevant local authorities, to establish the potential for alternative use in advance of deciding on their disposal. Such alternative use includes the potential for them to be made use for social housing need. The OPW has been actively involved with the relevant authorities to identify potential properties within their portfolio which could be considered suitable to address the current housing issues. For example, the OPW agreed to make a number of properties available to the housing agency and is currently engaged with them in relation to leasing arrangements. In addition, the OPW recently made a property available to the Dublin Regional Homeless Executive. It's intended that this property will be used as a residential centre to support vulnerable women affected by long-term homelessness. Deputies will be aware that on the 20th of May last, my colleague, the Minister for Housing and Planning, published the implementation plan on the state's response to homelessness, in which the government's approach to delivery on its objective of ending involuntary long-term homelessness by the end of 2016 was set out. This plan sets out a range of measures to secure a ring-fenced supply of accommodation to house homeless households within the next 3 years and to mobilise the necessary supports. Progress on the implementation of the plan will be reported quarterly by the Minister for Housing and Planning through the Cabinet Committee on Social Policy. The Department of the Environment, Community and Local Government will chair a working group involving key stakeholders, and that group will identify potential suitable and available properties with a view to putting in place the necessary arrangements to facilitate their use as housing units. With regard to determining the criterion by which a property is judged suitable for social housing, this primarily is a matter for the relevant housing authorities. However, I'm advised in general the following criteria apply: the suitability of the property, given that many of them were built as Garda stations, the location of the properties and the level of demand in that area, and its current condition and the cost of refurbishment. As I stated earlier, the vacant state portfolio will form part of the option appraisal to deliver residential units currently being completed by each relevant local authority.
Clare Daly.
Yeah, okay. I don't think the Minister's response has an adequate level of detail considering the scale of the housing crisis that pertains at the moment. I note that you've said maybe one property has been made available in terms of homeless accommodation. I would put it to you that there is probably a severe need for many more than that. It's a certain irony that we are paying probably tens of millions to subsidise private hoteliers in short-term accommodation needs and homelessness when there are a number of state properties lying idle. Now, I know a number of those properties wouldn't be fully under your jurisdiction, but presumably the Cabinet could do more than that, and that we should have some sort of a multi-departmental task force. The issue came up particularly in relation to Defence Forces property, of which there is considerable amounts, including a number of dwelling houses and so on, which could be remediated at a relatively small amount of money, and yet we have been people evicted from those premises to be added to the growing homeless list for the local authorities. So what I suppose I'm asking is that there is a wide portfolio of properties. Many of them wouldn't be suitable in their present state, but would the Minister consider, given he is the Minister for Public Expenditure, take on board the idea of convening a task force to look at all state property under whatever remit is there, to see what alternative uses could be made of it, because there are plenty of unemployed builders out there who could be used to remediate it and make it suitable for housing purposes, which is far more sensible than subsidising the private sector.
No, I largely agree with virtually everything the Deputy has said. There isn't actually within the OPW a huge array of available properties or properties suitable for housing. There are approximately, I'll send you a detailed letter because I can't give you all the information verbally, but there's 440 properties in the OPW property portfolio that are deemed habitable. The vast majority are occupied by members of An Garda Síochána, therefore not available for letting. But there are others in the heritage portfolio, such as caretaker lodges, that are assigned to particular tasks, and again, they're not available. I referred, and you raised the point, to a number of properties identified by the OPW as being available. One is at Kildonan in Finglas. That has been made available as a residential centre to support vulnerable women. And I can send on the details of that. It's a two-storey residential school, including classrooms, indoor swimming pool, gymnasium, canteen, fully equipped kitchen, a number of outbuildings and so on. But the final point is, in terms of the overall coordination of that is happening. The Minister for Housing is doing that, and I will give full support to her across all departments to identify any property that might be brought expeditiously into use.
Deputy Wallace.
Thank you, Alison Corley. Minister, I think we're all more or less aware that there's a serious problem in this whole area, not just in the lack of supply of social housing, the supply of private, how the construction industry operates, how developers operate, land banking. It's a massive problem, and it's, for all practical purposes, it has gone unregulated in this country. I'm not saying it didn't start with this government, but it's been unregulated for years. It has. I don't know if it was ever regulated properly, and it would make so much more makes a lot of sense now if this government could regulate it properly. We've just seen housing prices go up in Dublin in the last year by 16%, rent went up by 11%, and wages didn't go up at all. I mean, there isn't any control. Minister, you might have noticed that there's a lot of big blocks of houses and apartments have gone for sale in the private sector in the last 2 years, and I know it's not completely under your remit, but do you think it would be a good idea, for example, there's nearly 500 units going for sale in Tala at the moment that Lean Carroll built, right? They're going to be sold for about 50,000 each. Now, you can't make social housing out of all them, but given that if they were sold individually to the public, they'd be paying a minimum of 150,000, 160,000 for them. What do you think of the idea of the State Minister buying them and putting 20 or 30% state social housing in them and selling the others to individuals who are looking for them, rather than allowing investors, usually from foreign lands, actually buy the whole block for a fraction of what they're worth?
Minister.
Again, I strongly agree with the Deputy that we have a real supply issue, and that is manifest by increasing rents in Dublin now, pushing people, including people who are dependent on rent subsidy, out of markets in Dublin and surrounding areas in particular. Less impactful on our own county as of yet, and it is an issue that we have to address. So how do we address the supply issue? I haven't made public this yet, but I have asked, and I met formally with the National Treasury Management Agency some weeks ago, and for them to engage with all the MTMA family, with NAMA and others, to see if we can provide a mechanism to fund initiatives exactly of the sort you've talked about. I am due to have a report on that in the next couple of weeks, and I hope to be able to report progress to the House once that's done.
Thank you, Minister. I have to group a question if you want to ask another question. We're running out of time. Deputy Wallace and Deputy Daly.
Thank you, Mr. Corley. Yeah, Minister, that sounds positive, and I'm glad to hear it. There's no doubt the whole principle of Part 5 in the past as well was a very good idea, but as we know, it wasn't implemented, and unfortunately, the previous government reneged on it, and they allowed developers to actually shove, to ghettoise the units into other areas. And very often they said that, oh, it didn't really suit because such and such type of houses were built. But I mean, I would like this government to take on the situation rather than do away with Part 5. I mean, if you're having to encourage people to build houses, you should not abandon the idea of Part 5. And if you're building 20 mansions on a site, well, okay, you don't want mansions for social housing, but if 20% of the land is used for social purposes, then put sensible units on 20% of it, beside the mansions, and don't let them to move them out of the area where ghettoisation goes ahead, because we're just sowing huge social problems for the years ahead when we do allow it.
Deputy Daly.
Yeah, I think the point here is that the state has to lead in this regard, and subsidising the private sector isn't the way forward. I would be interested in the detail that the Minister said he would furnish in terms of the state's portfolio, but I would again say if it is the Department of the Environment, fine, but somebody has to take stock of all of the properties in state ownership and prioritise those then that can be converted and retrofitted as housing purposes, because it's cheaper and more efficient and is a quicker way of delivering housing stock that's so badly needed, rather than money being wasted down the tubes on the private sector.
Thank you. Final reply, Minister.
Yeah, there are two discrete and separate issues. One is dealing with homelessness, and we have a strategy to deal with that over the next 3 years. But then there's the normal housing situation, which is also an acute problem now that we need to address separately. They overlap, but they're two separate issues. I agree with what's been said in relation to Part 5, and I've had first-hand testimony from many of my own colleagues, where you know, a developer was allowed to build very upmarket houses in one location, and for an allocation of land or housing in a completely separate location, and separated the people that are going to populate each of those houses. And I think that wasn't an effective or socially desirable way of dealing with Part 5, and something that we obviously have to address. But it's not for me. It's not in my area of responsibility. But I fully accept that we need to have joined-up government approach in relation to the housing issue. And from where it falls to me in relation to, I mean, this is a very confined question in relation to public sector property, but we will look at that. But that is not going to be a solution, because, you know, retrofitting a Garda station for accommodation is a tokenistic response. It'll be important to the individual families, but to really solve the problem, we need to tackle the supply issue that has been identified by Deputy Wallace.
Thank you, Minister.